Meanwhile, Ramaphosa's attempts at a coalition government might have received its very first controversy. Centre-right party Democratic Alliance has suspended one of its lawmakers after an old video of the legislator using explicitly racist language resurfaced online. Well, the suspension of the recently sworn-in Member of Parliament, Ronaldo Goes, highlights the uneasy alliance between the DA and its governing coalition partner, the African National Congress, which is the former liberation movement that spearheaded the struggle against apartheid in South Africa. Well, joining me now is Ibrahim Farouk, who is the program coordinator of the Africa division at the civil society organization Yaga Africa. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it depends on which side of the divide you stand. Is the relationship between South Africa and Nigeria getting more, kosher, or is it drifting apart? But we'll come to that eventually. Let's look at this coalition government. Some are saying this, coalition is not all that good for democracy, while some others are saying it's the best way forward. Inclusive government is a way that not only South Africa should be going, but other African countries who might find themselves in similar, situations. Your take?
I think I definitely agree with you that an inclusive government is definitely the way to go. Unfortunately for the ANC at this point in time, it was the first time that they never had that majority in parliament, and so they were forced into this coalition with whoever was willing to join the coalition. And if you remember, the ANC led by Cyril Ramaphosa actually issued a call to the other political parties to join what he called his government of national unity. That was turned down by some of the other political parties.
Like Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto
Yes, like
Wesizwe.
Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto Wesizwe and Julius Malema's Economic Freedom Fighters. However, in what seemed like a very unlikely alliance, the Democratic Alliance accepted to join this coalition and thereby giving the coalition the majority that it needed in Parliament to produce the next president. So we have what we'd call traditional rivals in the South African space. And it's interesting to see for the first time both the ANC and the DA in coalition. But I think there are also positive signs. We've seen how the stock market in South Africa has reacted to the news, for instance, and also how the rand has reacted to it, and the currency has strengthened following the news. So I believe that these are promising signs for South Africa. But beyond that, definitely it would be a delicate balance, seeing as ANC has seen as the party that spearheaded the liberation movement from apartheid, and the DA is seen as a predominantly white party in South Africa.
Yeah, and some are saying it's strange bedfellows, or strange political bedfellows. So what challenges do you envisage with this coalition?
As with many different coalitions, there are also many differences on opinions, either when it comes to managing the economy, when it comes to foreign policy stance. For instance, when you look at the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, and when you have one party who stands with one party in that conflict and another political party in South Africa standing with another party in that conflict. And even if you look at things like the war between Israel and its offensive in Gaza, and when you have political parties who take different sides on that, it makes you wonder how they are going to manage that relationship, especially when it comes to issues around foreign policy. It also makes you wonder how they are going to manage issues around the economy and decisions that are going to be taken. The DA, for instance, has always been seen as an advocate against corruption that has been, those corrupt allegations that have been labeled against the ANC.
Right.
So it's interesting to see that the ANC and the DA are now in coalition when they are, like you said, strange bedfellows or traditional political rivals.
Yes, indeed. Let's talk about, back here in Nigeria. Are there lessons that Nigeria can glean, from this coalition? Only recently on democracy, Democracy, Eve of Democracy Day here in Nigeria, we heard from the former president, Goodluck Jonathan, who actually, frowned at this idea of a winner-takes-all kind of politics that we play. He's saying if a party, for example, scores as much as 30%, it really should have a place at the table. Is that what Nigeria can begin to look in the direction of?
I think it's interesting because former President Goodluck Jonathan was also in South Africa to observe the elections, right. And Yaga Africa also deployed an election study and observation mission. But we have different political systems in Nigeria and in South Africa. And in Nigeria, we have what political scientists would call first past the post, meaning once you have the highest number of votes cast in that election and you also meet some other constitutional provisions, meeting some certain percentages in a certain number of states, you're declared the winner. But I think recently there have been conversations around examining how a winner is declared, especially in a presidential election, especially in a country that is as diverse as ours, with such a huge population. We've seen many other African countries adopt this 50% or 50 plus 1%. We've seen it in Liberia and in Sierra Leone that had elections last year. And we can see it also in South Africa this year. I think that this provision in the constitutions of those countries is to ensure that there is widespread acceptance and that there is legitimacy.
Do you think Nigeria should begin to think of tinkering with the constitution?
I think that for every opportunity, every opportunity we have for electoral reform, it's important to have those wide consultations and listen to the voices of citizens and what we believe works best for us. Yeah. I think in the past 25 years of our democracy, we have used the first past the post system where the winner has the highest number of votes, and that is what has worked for us. And if we reflect and have that conversation among the different groups and interests that make up this collective called Nigeria, and we come to that agreement and say we need to reform this process in leadership selection to say, whoever becomes a president or the executive at other subnational levels needs to win at least 50% of the votes cast. Yeah. I think it's a proposal that will go through the National Assembly, and if it receives the support of the Nigerian people, it will either be amended in the Constitution or in the Electoral Act.
Are there other lessons that Nigeria can learn, especially from the electoral process in South Africa?
Yes, I think one of the greatest greatest lessons that we can learn from the elections in South Africa is the importance of transparency in the electoral process. And one of the things that our mission to South Africa saw was transparency when it came to results management, for instance. There were independent auditors who were able to check election results as they were being fed to the IEC, to the election management body in South Africa. But also political parties and media organizations were given access codes where they're able to access the information, the results as they were coming into the dashboard. There was also an electronic dashboard where citizens could access it. And very interestingly, at one point, the dashboard went down. It was out of service for a few minutes. But there was also very prompt response from the IEC, from the election management body in South Africa, to explain that they are currently experiencing some challenges, and as soon as those challenges were resolved, and so transparency helps to build trust. And when there's very little transparency, it builds that culture of mistrust in the electoral process.
Absolutely, and that's not good for democracy. Ibrahim Farouk, Yaga Africa, thank you. As always, thanks for joining us.